by the age of 11, I was smoking on a pretty regular basis. And I can remember 11 being the first time I got drunk.
Wow.
Uh, and so at 11 years old, I was with my friends drinking Jack Daniels.
Wow.
Um, and that became a pattern, as well as drugs.
Hey everyone, the voice you just heard is that of Tim Thomas. Tim talks about what life was like growing up, from running the streets, drinking and doing drugs and hanging with the wrong crowd, to getting married, settling down, and finding Jesus. No matter if you believe in God or not, we can all learn something from his life story. I hope you find his story as inspiring as I did. I'm your host, David Hess. This is Rising Above. Enjoy the show.
So, hey, Tim, how are you doing?
Doing great, David. How are you?
I'm doing good. I want to thank you for coming on the Rising Above podcast, and you're here to share a little bit about your life story and a little bit about your childhood and kind of how that influenced your life as an adult and whatnot. So, without further ado, would you mind kind of sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Really, the first thing I want to tell you, David, is I really want to thank you for your vision to put this podcast together. I definitely see a huge need for it. I've definitely thought about how could I share my story and maybe help somebody else rise above their circumstances, and I just haven't had that avenue. So I really appreciate your vision to do this, and hoping it's very successful.
Well, thank you. I hope so as well.
Yeah. So, my story starts kind of like everybody's in childhood, and mine was not exactly picture perfect, as most people's aren't. But I'm a little hesitant to talk about some of it because as I get into this, you're going to see my parents aren't always painted in a really positive light, and I just want to say I recognize they were young. They're not the same people today that they were back then. I have no grudges or ill feelings toward my parents. Um, so I just want to say that. But as it turns out, I'm the oldest of four kids, and as far back as I can remember, it was pretty dysfunctional. Um, I'm the oldest. Then I have a sister and two brothers. And what I remember back to my earliest childhood memories is my parents fighting. And the fighting was pretty nasty. And I remember being scared a lot when my parents would fight. It wasn't a situation where somebody was being abused. I remember it more as mutual fighting. And I can remember sometimes my mom would grab a broomstick and chase my dad, and he'd run in the bathroom and hide. And at other times, they would be physical with each other. And I can remember, them getting in like a physical clinch and pulling each other's hair. And one time, my dad kind of jerking my mom's hair and hurting her neck. And sometimes they'd end up rolling on the floor. And I can remember them spitting in each other's face. And so not a good, environment. But the other thing is both of my parents have suffered from some mental illnesses. And again, I don't want to spend this whole podcast on my little one-off aside notes, but I do want to just say something about that. Keep in mind, I'm 54 years old, so the time period that I'm talking about now is in the early 70s.
Okay.
And I think there's still a lot of stigma attached to mental illness. A lot of times mental illness is viewed as weakness, which is kind of bizarre, I mean, it's a problem with the brain. And, if somebody is diabetic and they need insulin, we don't look at that as a weakness. Somebody has heart issues, we don't look at that as a weakness. But for some reason, there's this stigma attached to mental illness.
Right.
And it was even probably more so back in the early 70s, right? So both of my parents kind of struggled, and my mom especially did. And I can remember she was actually hospitalized because of her problems she was having, and I was just a little kid. One time in particular, I was again the oldest of four, so I was the only one that was actually in school. I was seven, which would have made the other siblings 4, 3, and newborn.
Wow.
And I came home from school one day, and my mom wasn't there, and nobody was home actually, and some neighbors picked me up, and I really was young, didn't understand what was going on, but looking back now, it was my mother was hospitalized and needed to be hospitalized for her illness. And at the time, my dad was working for a local pharmaceutical company, a factory worker basically, but he worked second shift. So second shift was 3:30 p.m. to midnight.
Right.
So he couldn't take care of me because I went to school and I was home at night, so he was unable to take care of me. My mom, obviously hospitalized, couldn't take care of me. The younger siblings, they all went off to stay with my grandparents, who lived out in the country, out in the rural area of Indiana. So they were fine, well taken care of, but there was the issue of what to do with me. Now I know about your story and your brother, and I've heard a lot about foster care, and I don't really know what the foster care system was like in the early 70s, but I never was put into that system. It was more kind of an informal foster care, you might say.
Okay.
I got kind of tossed from neighbor to neighbor. And what really complicated the situation for me was I was a bedwetter. That's not super comfortable to talk about, but I think it's probably more common than we know. But
Yes,
I was a bedwetter.
especially with kids with trauma.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing. Kids, neighborhood kids, can be just grossly cruel. So, on a daily basis, people in the neighborhood used to make fun of me about my mom and the problems that she had. But anyway, so I got tossed from kind of neighbor to neighbor, and I was pretty young, so my time, thinking about time and how long I was with one neighbor versus another's kind of fuzzy. But it wasn't real exciting for people to take in this kid that peed all over their furniture, or
Right.
I slept on a lot of couches and stayed at some different neighbors. That sometimes I stayed with some family members or friends of the family, and much like the foster care system, not all of them were nice to me. I can remember one old couple that I stayed with one time, and I can remember waking up and their house was freezing, and I was standing there in my wet clothes that morning, shivering, and I remember the man like saying stuff, yelling at me and saying stuff to me like, "Well, you wouldn't be so cold if you didn't piss all over yourself," and
Oh wow.
things like that. So yeah, not the most loving environment.
And that was a neighbor.
I'm sorry.
That was one of your neighbors.
Yeah, that was like an older couple that I stayed with for a while. That they lived outside the neighborhood, and I'm not really sure how many different people I stayed with, but it was a lot. And my mom's hospitalization, um, it happened over a couple of years, where like she would go in the hospital and be in there for months at a time. Um, and I can remember certain things because it revolved around the holidays. So I remember for like a couple years in a row, my mom would go into the hospital before Thanksgiving and not come out until after New Year's. So she would be in there like for Christmas and stuff. And,
Wow.
but yeah, and there's just so many things. Again, the 70s were a different time than now. And I can remember being in situations that you just couldn't imagine a 7-year-old kid being in. One thing I remember, there was one period of time where I stayed with my aunt and uncle, but he drove a bread truck. So he had like a bread route. So he had to start work really early in the morning. So the only way they could get me to school was for him to drop me off at the school at some really ridiculous hour, like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And I remember the school wasn't even open yet, but like there was like a foyer area. So there was one door I could get in, and then the school was locked. And he would take me there and drop me off, and I would go inside that first door and just sit there and wait for the janitor to come in
Wow.
in the morning. So there I was, like 7-year-old kid, just yeah, some strange, bizarre situations. But eventually my mom got better, and I think part of it was when my parents got divorced. So when I was 9, my parents got divorced. So that means my other siblings were like 5, 4, and 2. Um, but the interesting thing is, how I looking back and I think, how could my mom have gotten better? She was in that marriage, and they were just not right for each other for sure. But so my mom had custody of us through the week, and then my dad would take us. I can't remember if it was every weekend or every other weekend. So again, it's probably very difficult for both of them to try to manage 4 kids on their own. But my mom definitely had the hardest part to have us through the week. But she went to work as a secretary for an organization. So somehow she was working full time, taking care of all of us, dealing with daycare, and I don't even know how she managed all that. But I can tell you one thing: we never went without food. We never went without the basic necessities. We were never abused, so to speak. But what we were was neglected, which looking back, I don't hold grudges against my mom because I don't know how she did what she did. But we were pretty much left to ourselves a lot. And so we kind of like ran the neighborhood. I can remember being 10, 11 years old, hanging out with my friends. We grew up about 2 miles from the Indianapolis 500.
Okay.
And I can remember being out there the night before the race with everybody partying and everything. And I was just a little kid just hanging out.
Wow.
So I think for the most part, especially as the oldest, if I was out of sight, I was kind of out of mind. And so, there's somewhat of an element of Lord of the Flies, like when the kids are left on their own, it devolves into chaos.
Right. Yeah.
But, I started hanging out with a bunch of kids in the neighborhood, and I should probably point out, because I think it's somewhat relevant, where we grew up was in a government subsidized apartment complex. I guess sometimes people call that the projects.
Okay.
So there were a lot of kids in the exact same scenario. I mean, again, this is the early 70s. So this is kind of the beginning of what was referred to as latchkey kids. Parents divorcing, a lot of kids on their own after school, letting themselves in, taking care of themselves. So it wasn't like I was the only one in that situation. But so all my friends were pretty much in that same situation. And we all kind of ran around and got in a lot of trouble together. And as the oldest of 4, a lot of times I was kind of the protector for the other ones. I know I heard that from Michael, and I heard that from you with your little brother, and I kind of fell into that role as well. And my brothers and sister really used it to their advantage.
Oh,
They would go out and cause trouble with neighborhood kids, and then they'd say, "Oh yeah, I'll get my big brother over here." And
I might have been guilty of that once or twice.
yeah, it kind of happens. You feel a little bit bolder and empowered when you've got a big brother to
Yeah.
lean on. So I got in a lot of fights. I mean, I got in a lot of fights. And I will say this, getting punched in the face is not always a bad thing. It can really make you kind of rethink things,
Right. Yep.
Sometimes I think that might be missing from our society today. Not that I think we should do that, but
I agree. I mean, it shouldn't happen, but sometimes it's necessary.
yeah,
It
there's a lot of
teaches.
people I think, if you got hit in the face one time, you might
Wouldn't
rethink
do
how
that.
you're talking to people.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I also would be the perpetrator against my sister and brothers.
Okay.
So I was a lot of times a little rough with them. I mean, a lot of the friends that I hung around with, that's where the abuse came in my life, because even though they were my friends, I was hanging out with them every day. They were older than me, and a lot of them had older brothers, and I think maybe their older brothers bullied them, and they kind of would go, but that kind of stuff is passed on.
Right.
Bullies often bully people.
Yeah.
Um,
Hurt people, hurt people.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can remember them just like sitting around bored, and like they would come up with these wild ideas like, okay, Timmy, I was Timmy back in those days. Okay, Timmy, I'm going to give you three choices. I can either punch you in the groin one time really hard, or I'll punch you 5 times in your thigh as hard as I can, or I'll punch you 10 times in the arm.
Oh my gosh.
Like those were my only options, right? So I'd be like, okay, in the arm, and I spent a lot of my life and during that time pretty bruised up. And a lot of times I would bring that home and I would do the exact same thing to my brother.
Right.
Yeah. It was bad, but unsupervised, we kind of did a lot of things. And the other thing with the neighbors was the drugs and alcohol and smoking. And, I have 4 kids of my own now, and I can't even imagine any of them being in any of the situations I was in. So again, with my parents being divorced when I was 9, me running the neighborhood, by the age of 11, I was smoking on a pretty regular basis. And I can remember 11 being the first time I got drunk.
Wow.
And so at 11 years old, I was with my friends drinking Jack Daniels.
Wow.
And that became a pattern, as well as drugs. Drugs were pretty prevalent.
I imagine if you grew up what you call, the projects, drugs and alcohol are probably rampant, within the neighborhood.
They were, yeah, and definitely in the crowd I was running with. Fortunately for me, it was the 70s, so I did every drug that came my way, but I never saw heroin in my neighborhood, and I think that was probably a little before cocaine became popular.
Okay.
So, but it was a lot of marijuana. In like 7th and 8th grade, I think I smoked pot almost every single morning at the bus stop before school. So I was going to school high almost every day. And then on the weekends, I would just tell my mom, hey, I'm going to stay all night with a friend. And, she had no clue what was going on. It was never gave me any trouble. It was like, okay. And I would disappear, be gone all weekend, and all kinds of stuff would be going on. But there was a lot of pot, hash, LSD, a lot of pills, uppers, downers. That was the days when there was a popular pill called Quaaludes, and
Okay.
so that was pretty popular in those days. And frankly, there were a lot of times that I got myself in situations where it's just a miracle that I'm not dead. But things really changed around the time that I got to high school age. So interestingly, at age 15, so I've been using drugs and smoking and drinking for about 4 years at that time. At the age of 15, somehow I came to the idea that drugs are stupid. And so at age 15, when a lot of people are starting, I quit using drugs. But I still drank quite a bit. But in high school, early in high school, I got in some trouble, got in a fight at school, and that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for my mom. And she decided I was going to go live with my dad. And so I did go move with my dad. And, it's not that my dad was in some way a better parent. But for me, the change of environment had a huge impact. So all of a sudden I was not in that environment. He lived in an apartment complex, but it was a little bit nicer. There wasn't kind of that influence. And when I got into high school, I got involved with marching band. So I played trombone, and I really loved that, got into the band, and the band was really a good thing for me at that time. It kind of gave me a positive place to put my energy. And so I kind of became a different person around that time. And during high school, my mom actually had worked herself to the point where she got an opportunity for a promotion that moved her from Indiana to North Carolina. And so she moved with my sister and my two brothers to North Carolina. And, that physical distance, as well as the fact that I moved in with my dad and I started doing better, it created kind of a real distance with me and my mom in our relationship that lasted for many, many years. Um, but anyway, the high school band gave me a lot of productive things to do. And I met a girl and we started dating. And she came from a really nice family. Um, to be honest with you, if I were her parents, I would have not let me anywhere near their daughter. But they were always so nice to me, welcomed me as part of the family, and I can remember going to their house for dinner and seeing this man and his wife, and they had 4 kids too, coincidentally. And I could see the love in the family. They would sit around the table and eat dinner together and laugh. And something happened to me at that time, and I said, "That's what I want. That is this is what I want out of my life." And that really stuck with me. After high school, I did what I thought I was supposed to do, which was go to college. I applied to Indiana University in Bloomington, got accepted, and I went down there to college. I took out student loans, but I was lost, man. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And I took classes that were supposed to help me figure out what to do, and I just couldn't get it figured out. And so one day I was talking to a friend of mine who was still in Indianapolis, and he was my best friend all through high school. And he said, "I'm thinking about joining the Army." And I said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So we decided to join the Army under what they called the buddy system, where you were supposed to be guaranteed to go through training together. As it turns out, we never spent one day in the Army together.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, it was a really good thing for me. So I joined the Army, but unfortunately, I took a lot of my bad habits with me. And I didn't really make the most of it. I got in a lot of trouble in the Army, but at least nobody had to bail me out. I was on my own, but it was the drinking.
Were you still with that girl from high school?
Yeah, so that relationship survived for about 2 years into the Army,
Okay.
but it was actually just my drinking and just very low self-opinion of myself that I essentially self-destructed that relationship. I think there was something inside me that was like, I'm not worthy of this girl and her family, and I sort of self-destructed that.
Okay.
And really was about to self-destruct myself because I was just drinking so heavily. I was getting in a lot of trouble. It was always for underage drinking, or I got in a fight outside of a bar one night and got arrested for that. I never did get arrested for a DUI, pretty much because I always knew if I was going out to drink, I was getting hammered. So I never drove. But anyway, at one point I got deployed to Honduras, and I met a young lady there, and it started getting serious. And all of a sudden, I started caring about life a little bit more, and not to get too far down that path, but we ended up going out, and I knew the first time we went out, I'm going to marry this girl. So it was about a year later, I did marry her, and I married her just a couple months before I got out of the Army. And so we got out of the Army, we went back to Indiana, and my first job I got out of the Army was fixing copiers for $5 an hour.
Wow.
Yeah, and so the one thing about getting married, it didn't fix everything. I was still drinking, but only on the weekends. But I felt this sense of responsibility, like, wow, I've got a wife now. I gotta work hard. So when I got my first paycheck, after they subtracted the health insurance and everything, I saw right away this is not going to be enough to live off of. So, but I did what I had to do. I got second jobs. Um, uh, One of the things that I did, so this pharmaceutical company I mentioned my dad worked for, both of his parents also worked for that same company, and my mom worked for that company till she got pregnant with me. And that's where I really wanted to work. And so that was the first place I applied when I got out of the Army. But sometimes, places like that, it's not a fast process.
Right.
Right. But there I was fixing copiers, not making enough money. So one of the things I did was um, I had the name of a guy in HR. So I wrote him a letter. And I basically said, hey, look, this is my family history. These are all the people who've worked there. I want to work here. I really want to work at this company. And I'm not going to rest until I work at this company. I think it was like maybe a week or two after I sent the letter, they called me back in for another interview.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up getting the job. And I heard you talk about how, getting your job was life changing for you.
Yep.
This was that for me.
Okay.
Even though it wasn't like, I was in some elite position. I mean, I started out at this pharmaceutical company my job title was utility operator.
Okay.
And what that basically meant was I mixed up gelatin and dyes to make capsules, and I swept the floor, and I made sure the paper towel dispensers were full. And it wasn't a glamorous job, but it was a good company, good benefits.
You were essentially the grunt of the company.
I was, yeah, I was great, and I was okay with that because one of the one person who was really a positive influence in my life growing up, even when things were so bad, was my grandfather. And when I joined the Army initially, my first contract was to be a military policeman. Okay. And when my grandpa heard that, he was like, "What are you doing? Why do you not know about the opportunities the Army has?" And he said, "You need to go back and renegotiate your contract, do something else." I mean, not that there's anything wrong with police. I have full respect for police. That just wasn't my calling. So I ended up going back and getting a job in electronics, which gave me some good training. And so my grandpa was good in that regard. But yeah, so anyway, I was okay with starting at the bottom, working my way up, which I did. And I did pretty well there. And then the interesting thing was, so there I was, I had the job I wanted. I had a wife. And in 1990, we had our first child. So my oldest daughter was born, and I was starting to have everything that I wanted. I had a good job. I had the job I wanted. I had my wife. I had a daughter. And not only that, we had just built a house, which in 1992, we built our first house. And that's the first house I ever lived in. Wow. My entire life was in apartments. So I'd never lived in a house before. So I had everything. But yet,
American dream. It was the American dream.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, exactly. I had the American dream, but yet, for some reason, I just still felt empty. I couldn't explain it. I was like, man, I have everything, but I feel so dissatisfied and empty. And there's a quote by a guy named C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you know him or not, but
he's Narnia.
Narnia. Exactly. He wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, so people might have seen that movie, the movies made of that. But there's a quote by him that says, "If we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world." And that quote has really resonated with me because of what I was going through at this time and the way I felt. And there was no reason. There was no reason to feel unsatisfied. I had everything I wanted. Now, I will say I was not brought up in church at all. And actually, at that time, had you asked me, I would have definitely told you I was an atheist. But my wife, actually, she wasn't a Christian when we got married, but very shortly after we got married, she became a Christian. And then I had my grandfather, who I mentioned we were close to. He was a Christian, and when I got out of the Army, he and I became really good friends. I spent a lot of time with him, and if there was an Indiana University basketball game on, I was probably at his house in his living room watching it with him.
Oh, cool.
But I knew he was a Christian, and there was one time where he actually had one of the pastors at his church come and visit my house to visit me and try to talk to me. And I remember it was raining outside, and there was a ring at the doorbell. I opened the door. I saw him, and he said, "Hi, I'm Pastor such and such from such and such church. Wonder if we could come in and talk to you." I said, "Not interested." Slammed the door in his face. So I was not interested. Um, but that prompted me to ask my grandpa one time while we were watching a basketball game, "What is it with Christians? Why do you feel like you got to ram it down everybody's throat? Why can't you just go to church, have fun, sing your songs, just leave everybody else alone?"
Right.
And I remember that he said, "Yeah, that's a good question. Why would somebody go out in the rain and subject themselves to somebody slamming a door in their face? Why would they bring that upon themselves? Maybe they have something that's so good that they feel they need to share it." So, okay. I thought that was an okay answer. And I would find myself wondering sometimes, and I would like kind of blurt out short little prayers in my head, like, "God, if you really are there, just show yourself to me. I mean, if I'm supposed to be acknowledging you or following you, just show yourself to me." Nothing? Okay. And then something interesting happened. So again, everything was going well in my life. One night I was in our brand new home. I was sitting down watching Monday Night Football, and a guy in the stand had a big sign he was holding up. And you know, a lot of times people have a sign that says John 3:16. This was something different because even though I wasn't brought up in church, I knew what John 3:16 was, or the basic idea behind it.
Right.
But John 3:3, this guy had a sign that said John 3:3. I was like, wonder what that is. So I asked my wife, "Hey, do you have a Bible?" And I imagine she probably about knocked me over with, the fact that I was even interested. But she gave me the Bible, and I looked up that verse, and it's the verse where it says you must be born again. So I was like, okay, that's that born again business, whatever. But then there was the Bible in my hands, and I thought maybe I should read it. I mean, I'm kind of searching. Why don't I read the Bible? And so this was a King James version of the Bible.
Okay.
And I tried to read the Bible different times in my life, and it's pretty boring, I thought. So I thought, well, let me read Revelations, because that's where the good stuff is, right? So I tried to read Revelation in a King James Bible, and I had no idea what I was reading. It was gibberish as far as I was concerned. So I started thinking, okay, well, maybe that's why people go to church. Maybe you need a pastor to help you understand it or something. So I told my wife. My wife was at that time regularly attending a church where they spoke both Spanish and English. And so I told my wife, "Look, I'll go visit church with you once, but I just want to sit in the back. I don't want anybody driving me nuts just because I show a little interest." And she's like, "Yeah, okay, fine, yeah." So I went to her church. Well, it turns out it was a church of about 30 people. So there's no such thing as hiding in the back. Of course, I met everyone. I met the pastor, and yeah, so I sat through the church. I didn't really get much out of that first time, really. So I went home, and the next Tuesday, I got a phone call from that pastor. "Hey, Tim, this is the pastor. So good. I was wondering if we could come and visit you." And I said, "No, you cannot." And I hung up the phone, and I started yelling at my wife. I knew it. I knew if I showed a little interest, they were going to start trying to beat my door down. But then I started thinking, I'm the one searching here. He's willing to come and talk to me. Why not talk to him? So I went back to church the next Sunday, and I approached him afterwards, and I said, "Hey, if you're going to visit people this week, you can come and visit me." He said, "Great, we'll come and visit you Tuesday." So he came, and he brought a guy with him who was a missionary to Brazil, but was home on furlough. And they started talking to me. And one of the things that was a hang up for me was the smoking. So I was still I was smoking 2 packs a day on a regular basis. Wow. Tried to quit a couple times. And in my head, I thought, well, Christians can't smoke. You know, I'm not trying to say that now. I didn't understand Christianity, but that's what I thought in my head. So that was one thing I was saying, I'm not going to be able to do this. But they came and they talked to me, and I'm telling you, this guy who was the missionary of Brazil, it was as if he could read my mind. They talked to me, and they just told me the basics, that God created me, that we all fall short of his glory, that Jesus came to save the world. You trust in him and follow him, you'll be saved, and you live for him. But man, that smoking thing was in the back of my mind. But anyway, this other guy, he looked at me and he said, you know what, Tim? A lot of people think that they have to fix themselves before they can come to Jesus. He said, it doesn't work like that. You come to Jesus, he'll do the work in you that he wants to do. And it clicked. And it was like a light switch came on. And what I didn't believe before, I did believe. And so that night, it was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, 1992. I asked Jesus to come into my life, and I would follow him. So, I guess that now makes me a Christian. And so this is the part where, again, I hope I don't get on a soapbox here, but I'm probably going to for a little bit if you'll allow me.
You're okay.
I hate labels. I despise labels. I look around our country right now, and I see that people want to put a label on you so that they can then pigeonhole you and apply all of what they think that means onto you and judge you, right? I mean,
it's a simplistic way of looking at things.
It is. It's very simplistic, but I mean, we certainly see it with politics, right? If I call you a Republican, I can put all of what I think that means onto you. If I call you a liberal, I can put all of what I think that means onto you. And it's just all keeps us divided.
Yep.
And unfortunately, I think that's been done to the word Christian. I think, and part of it, I think the blame falls on Christians or people who call themselves Christians. I listened to your story and I cringed at some of the things I heard because I see it all the time. People who say that they're Christians do things quite contrary to what they are. And again, I'm not here to judge anybody. I am certainly imperfect myself. But I am a person who, I read the Bible almost every single day. My morning typically starts out with I come into my office by myself early. I spend some time praying. I read and I study the Bible. And that kind of helps me get aligned. I need that. So I've been a Christian for 28 years now. And if I can, instead of using that label Christian, if you'll allow, I'd rather be referred to as a follower of Jesus because I don't like some of the stuff that's been attached to it.
It's a generic term.
Yeah, it's too easy to claim that. But if I look at the entire Bible, which so many people misuse to pick out this verse and that verse, and they use it as a book of, oh, you can't do this and you can't do that. That's not the story of the Bible at all. The story of the Bible is that we all fall short. Jesus came to not just save us. It's not fire insurance to keep us from going to hell. His intention is that we become part of his family and that we then communicate and share that love with the world. I mean, it really boils down into we are supposed to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And if people who call themselves Christians are running around, wagging their finger in people's face, tying themselves to a certain political party, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. Sorry, I'm probably starting to get on that soapbox. But I'll tell you something that really helps me. There are some verses in the Bible that, so Jesus himself said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, evildoers. So, Jesus is basically saying there's a lot of people out there who think they're followers of me, and they're going to find out too late that they're not. That haunts me. That, I don't want to be that person. I want to be that guy who's loving people like I'm supposed to, and loving everybody. I mean, there are so many people out there who are misfortunate, homeless, you name it. And for many years of my life, I spent time with Christians who, instead of reaching out to help those who are downtrodden, they want to try to say, well, why are they that way? Or is there substance abuse involved? Or I don't want to enable them. And you know what? Jesus didn't do that. Jesus met people right where they were, and he tells us to love people the same way. So, yeah. Anyway, back to how that applied to my life. So my wife and I, we were, again, now I had more of a sense of purpose in my life. And my wife and I and our children, that we had, we grew up to 3 kids. At that time, we started going to a very large church on the north side of Indianapolis, and we just felt every week we'd go to church, we'd hear the word, and we felt compelled to serve more, do more. And eventually that led, surprisingly, the job I worked so hard to get at the pharmaceutical company. I ended up leaving that job, and my wife and I went to work for a nonprofit organization who their primary mission was to, teach the Bible to kids and after school programs and backyard Bible clubs. So we started doing that as volunteers first, and then eventually the opportunity opened up for us to do that full time.
You quit your job to go do that for you're not making any money whatsoever.
Yeah. So the way that worked was you had to raise your own financial support.
Okay. So it's kind of like missionary work.
It is exactly like missionary work. And our intention really when we went into it was that eventually we would go overseas.
Okay.
But my wife being a native Spanish speaker, we kind of thought we'd probably end up in Central America or Latin America somewhere. But at the time, what we saw was, this would be in the 90s now, and there was a huge influx of Latin Americans into the Indianapolis area. And so we kind of thought, well, we don't really need to go anywhere. They're coming to us. Right. But what we did do was, I quit that job. People thought I was crazy. But really, when I look back on it, God changed the desires of my heart so that it was an easy decision for me. It wasn't hard at all. I just did what I wanted to do. So we quit, and not only did I quit the job, but we also sold that house we built in the suburbs. We sold it and we moved into the inner city. So we were doing inner city work, and we did that for 5 years. So you can see at this point, there's already a rising above story there, right? The childhood was kind of shaky, but as I'm sure you've probably seen and will probably see all your life, rising above is more of a mentality or an attitude because you're probably going to have to do it more than once.
Yeah.
And this next part is just really hard because after 5 years, we finally felt like God was leading us to go to Nicaragua as missionaries in Nicaragua. And we were well on our way. We had already visited a couple times. We had housing lined up. We pulled our kids out of their private school and we purchased homeschool materials. We were almost there. And then in 2005, my life came unraveled. It started, the first little piece of it was, there we were, a nice little family with 3 kids. Our youngest was 9 at the time. And my wife became pregnant. After so much time without having a kid, I guess you forget what can happen if you're not careful, but she became pregnant again. So we thought through that and said, well, okay, maybe we just delay our going to Nicaragua a little bit till after the baby's born. And then like a month later, I had a minor health problem that I went to the doctor for. But in the process, he heard my heart murmur, which I had all my life, but he just felt like he wanted me to get checked out. So he ordered an echocardiogram. And then again, 2005, August 19th, I remember it well because that's my birthday.
Oh, wow.
On my birthday, I found out I had an aneurysm on my aorta. But what I also found out that day is that some people in the organization, the missions organization that we were working for, completely betrayed me and said some things about me that were not true, and basically submarine and derailed my application in Nicaragua, and it got denied.
Wow.
I mean, I was just blindsided. I was totally betrayed. But now all of a sudden, I found myself with an aneurysm, and I had strict orders not to lift anything over 10 pounds. So I really wasn't very employable. So not only did my application get declined, but they also terminated me from the missions organization. The mission organization that I raised my own support, they terminated me. So I was terminated. I had an aneurysm, unemployable, and my wife is pregnant. But this was a time where God provided through his people, because the people at our church came around us. They helped us. I did get an odd job for a while. For maybe 2 months, I was working cleaning offices on the night shift. It was like 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. I was cleaning offices. But then me and my employer I was managing about 25 people cleaning offices. And so in that line of work, a lot of times people don't show up for work. And so that meant I had to do their work. So a lot of times, instead of 1 o'clock in the morning, I was there till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning in offices, and I was alone. And so the employer and I kind of came to the agreement that with my aneurysm, that's probably not a good idea. Would not be good for business if they came in and found their cleaning person dropped dead during the night.
Right.
So I didn't have that job. But anyway, so the people in our church, they knew our whole story. They kind of came together and they came up with this. They basically pooled up a bunch of money, opened up an account, and paid all of our bills.
Wow.
So it wasn't until January of 2006. So during that time, I was unemployed for about 8 or 9 months. But in January of 2006, I had open heart surgery to repair my aneurysm, which is a weird thing because the aneurysm, I had no symptoms, but I was a walking time bomb. But once I went into the hospital and had open heart surgery, then I felt pretty bad.
I'm sure.
But then, as it turns out, I was still recovering from that in March of 2006 when our fourth child was born. And, don't get me wrong, complete blessing. Yes, it was a surprise, but she's an absolute blessing, and she's 14 now, and it was great. But yeah, so she was born, and then in April of 2006, I started a new job with a very good company. And interestingly, that pool of money that was pulled together, it ran out just as I got my first paycheck at that job.
Wow.
So all of our needs were supplied. God provided, and I was, you would think that's a spiritual high, and it kind of was. But then, I started this new job at this new company, and I had to start at the bottom again. So I was, back at the bottom. But what I have found in my life, starting at the bottom, wherever you start, if you show up for work at the time that you're supposed to be there, maybe even a little early, you work hard, you be willing to do extra, be willing to learn, try to learn more about the business. That's been very beneficial for me. So everywhere I've ever worked, that's suited me well. And at the company that I got hired in at that time, I advanced right up, did really well. But the bad thing that happened is I started letting bitterness take hold. instead of focusing on the hundreds of people who surrounded us and showed us love, I started focusing on those few people who did me wrong. Um, and I guess you could say I was also a little bit mad at God, which seems ridiculous to me. Who am I to be mad at God? But I was. And I let it, and see that bitterness, and it doesn't, same for me, it could happen, same for you. I noticed you don't have that bitterness in you, and that's what allows you to rise above and succeed.
Yeah.
If you focus on that bitterness, it's like taking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Right.
You're only hurting yourself. And for me, it really affected my life in a negative way. I pulled away from church and I pulled away from God. I didn't like fall into a life of sin. I didn't go back to drugs. I didn't cheat on my wife or anything like that, but I just distanced myself from the church and from God. And that went on for probably a good 9 years or so.
Oh, wow.
And I really wasn't going to church, and it was at a bad time too. I mean, my kids were in high school at that time, and I wasn't the example I wish I would have been for them at that time. But then I got an opportunity with that company I was working for to relocate. And so I relocated from Indiana to South Carolina. Um, and that move, which is something I really welcome, the older I got, I became a real wuss as it pertains to winters. I don't know how you live where you do, buddy.
I hate it.
Well, hopefully someday you'll have the same opportunity to relocate.
I hope so.
But for us, it was really good. And so at this point, our kids were older. My oldest was married, and they now have 2 kids, but they moved down here as well. So my daughter, her husband, and now we have 2 granddaughters. They live about 30 minutes away. So that's great. And then my number 3 child, second son, he moved down here with us. And then, of course, our youngest moved with us. Our oldest son, he still lives in Indianapolis with his wife. But when we moved, I guess, again, that change of environment, so I see a pattern. When I was in that bad neighborhood, moved in with my dad, the change of environment was a big turning point. This time it was as well, because now I've been able to get back in church, and I think I'm stronger now through that, although I went, what I refer to as my time in the desert where I really wasn't following God. Now that I am again, I have just a deeper passion, and I really want to serve more, and I really have a vision for the downtrodden, the homeless, and the people that are, a lot of people drive by, look away, but that Jesus would embrace. That's really what I want to be about now.
So to kind of bring things back a little bit, you said your mom moved to, is that North Carolina or South Carolina?
She moved to North Carolina.
North Carolina. So you're kind of closer to your mother.
We are, and we've I mentioned we've had kind of a distant strain. It's been strained over the years a lot, but I tell you, my mom is a person. I don't know anybody who has risen above more than her. She's really made a great life for herself. We are much closer now. We do talk more on a regular basis. I have definitely no ill feelings toward either of my parents. But yeah, so that relationship is definitely better these days.
So now I'm assuming you can probably see her a little bit more often. And
yeah. COVID is kind of, she's remarried, and her and her husband live up in North Carolina. And yeah, with COVID, it makes it kind of tough. But yes, we do see each other more often now.
Okay, that's good. So you said you have a passion for the homeless and helping out essentially the less fortunate. So what are you doing? What is your plans, and what's your ideas on possibly helping these people?
Yeah, the timing on this is incredible, because so we actually just joined a different church than we were going to. It's a very large church. It's a diverse, multicultural church, and we just joined a couple weeks ago. And so my wife and I have been trying to find out where we want to get plugged in, and all their services are virtual right now. And just this morning service, they talked about a project that they're involved in, where they're actually building housing, and they're trying to get home, having a place for homeless and serving the needs of homeless. We just saw that this morning and said that's the place where we want to be involved.
Wow.
So up to this point, we haven't done anything other than some light giving here and there, but that's this morning we both felt like that's where we want to serve.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, your story is absolutely amazing. I've been super excited to sit down and talk with you ever since you emailed me. I don't even know really what to look back and reflect on, but all I have to say is, it's a remarkable how someone can come from the position you were in, where you're on the streets taking drugs, and your life would have taken a completely different turn had you, possibly not joined the military.
Yeah. I think a lot about some of the kids that were my friends at that time, and some of them are dead.
Yeah.
One of my best friends when I was 10 died in prison. Sometimes I ask myself, why me? But, I've just been very fortunate.
I agree. And you and your family are amazing. You guys have always been great to me. And I don't know. Your story is remarkable. I don't know what to say.
And I think I don't think there's any accidents. Fully, I've laid myself out there today. This is who I am. If anything that I said today came across as self-righteous or holier than thou, then I blew it, because that's not my intention. I am a mess myself. I'm still struggling every day, but I have learned some things that have got me through in life. And again, you mentioned the American dream. It is alive and well. Do not let anybody tell you that it's not. We live in a society that is so quick to embrace victimhood, and that makes me sick, because I see too many people overcoming and too many people able to rise above. For me, I got to tell you, though, I could not rise above had it not been for Jesus being risen from the dead. So thought I wanted to make that little connection there. But so there are a lot of things, a lot of people, a lot of help I got along the way. But for me, apart from Jesus, I'd be just a complete and utter mess.
All right. I think we'll leave it at that. You did really good, Tim.
Thanks, David.
Your story is amazing, and I'm glad you came on to share with me. So
I appreciate the opportunity, and I really hope that this podcast reaches a lot of people and communicates that message to them, that you are not what happened to you, and you are not a product of your environment. You have the ability. This is the United States of America. I don't know how far the podcast goes. Maybe in some other countries, maybe there's not a lot of opportunity. But if you're born in America, that's only about 4% of the world's population. You've already hit the lottery as far as opportunity goes. So,
yep, it's true. So with that being said, I think we'll kind of end the podcast there, Tim. And I really appreciate it again. And I'm going to send you a text after this, because I want to send you some stuff.
Okay.
Podcast swag, as the kids call it these days.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Tim. And it's been nice talking to you.
It's been great talking to you too, David.
All right. Bye.
Bye.